and just 25 miles from London, has been at the heart of British royalty for nearly 1,000 years. It's actually the oldest castle that's still inhabited in the world, and would you believe, it has been home to 39 monarchs over the years. With all that history, it's no surprise that there are some spooky ghost stories tied to this place. During my extensive research, I have discovered 25 documented hauntings at the castle, and I can't wait to share them with you in this video. First, we start with the Tudors, a dynasty that brought some of the most powerful and ruthless rulers to the castle. However, it turns out that when they died, their massive personalities had some unfinished business to attend to, and as a result, it appears they left behind some of the castle's most terrifying ghosts. As you would probably guess, number 1 on the list is no other than King Henry VIII, the very man who executed 2 of his 6 wives and broke away from the Catholic Church. He became king on 22nd of April, 1509, and ruled for 38 years. He died in the early hours of Friday the 28th of January, 1547, at Whitehall Palace in London. It is documented that people have heard the laboured breathing and the heavy footsteps of a man around the Dean's cloister, along with a dragging sound, possibly his diseased leg. The experience is reported as horrifying, as these sounds continue until you feel someone is standing right beside you before it stops. Reports also exist of hearing a voice in the same area, a man's voice, as if speaking with some authority, and demanding answers. The consistent most reported words are, "Where is she?" So, I wonder who he is looking for. When you think about it, he had 6 wives. Realistically, it could be any of them. Imagine the scene if he met up with Anne. What do you think would happen? With that, we swiftly move on to Henry's second wife, Anne, Queen Anne Boleyn. Henry had her executed on the 19th May, 1536, at just 35 years old. She had been falsely accused of adultery and treason. Her only crime in Henry's eyes was not producing a male heir to the throne, having given birth to a female, Elizabeth, who later became Elizabeth I. Anne also appears in the cloister area of the castle. Reports say her reflection can be seen in the windows before a full apparition appears. Those who have seen her describe a beautiful woman in period dress with sad dark eyes, and an immense feeling of sadness is felt by those who have seen her. Reports of her have been reported for decades. There are also claims that witnesses have seen her lips move but could never make out the words. People claim to identify her by the bee necklace that she wore, as it is clearly visible. Unlike other reported sightings of Anne at other locations, her appearance at Windsor is said to not feel threatening, but just the look of profound sadness. Next we encounter Anne and Henry's daughter, Elizabeth, who later became Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen. She became queen at the age of 25 and ruled from 17th November 1558 until her death on the 24th March 1603. She was the last monarch of the Tudor dynasty. Her ghost appears most frequently in the castle's library, wearing her full gown and ruffled collar. She always appears to show interest in the books held in the library. Many of the reports have come from royals who stayed at the castle. King George VI reported several encounters with the Queen's spirit in the 1940s. Also, her namesake, Queen Elizabeth II, and the current King Charles III have also reported seeing the Queen's spirit in the library. Her ghost, when it appears, is said to acknowledge those present before she eventually vanishes. Reports claim you feel a sense of being quietly observed. One historian recalled whilst visiting the library in 1982, whilst seated at a table researching Tudor manuscripts, that he became aware of a presence in the room. When he looked up, he saw a vision of Elizabeth seated facing him. She nodded, as if approving what he was doing, before she vanished. As you can imagine, the encounter left him very shaken. What makes the Tudor hauntings so powerful is how perfectly they reflect each person's character in life. Henry remains a demanding tyrant who expects immediate obedience. Anne continues mourning the daughter she barely knew. Elizabeth maintains the careful, intelligent approach that made her one of England's greatest rulers. Death amplified their strongest traits, creating ghosts whose personalities shine through every supernatural encounter. These 3 spirits never appear together, as if even death cannot heal the wounds Henry inflicted on his family. But their individual hauntings serve as a reminder that some personalities are simply too strong for death to contain. We leave the Tudors behind and move forward to the 17th century that brought civil war, religious upheaval, and political revolution to England. The Stuart dynasty faced challenges that would destroy their power and ultimately cost King Charles I his head. These traumatic events created some of Windsor Castle's most tragic and restless spirits, ghosts forever marked by the violence and injustice that defined their era. Charles I appears as Windsor's most sorrowful phantom. On January 13th, 1649, this king became the only English monarch ever executed by his own people. Parliament put him on trial for treason, found him guilty, and beheaded him outside Whitehall Palace. His ghost returned to Windsor, the place where he spent his happiest years before the Civil War tore his kingdom apart. Witnesses who have seen his ghost describe Charles as a dignified figure, sometimes appearing whole, sometimes bearing the terrible wound of his execution. His ghost wears the same fine black velvet clothes he chose for his final day, complete with the white silk shirt that was supposed to keep him warm on the scaffold. You would think that would be the least of his worries on that day. It is documented that Charles's spirit is most often in the rooms where he spent his final 3 days during the winter of 1648. He appears in the early morning hours, kneeling in prayer with his hands clasped before him, as if still reciting the prayers he said before facing the executioner's block. When seen, the disturbing reports claim that he slowly turns his head toward the witness, his eyes filled with a sadness so deep it seems to reach into their souls. Then he fades away, leaving behind a bone-chilling cold. The most documented encounter with Charles's ghost occurred in 1954, when a night watchman making his rounds discovered what appeared to be a living man praying in one of the state rooms. The figure wore clothes that looked ancient. The watchman approached carefully, unsure if he had stumbled upon an intruder. When he challenged the figure, it looked up, revealing the unmistakable face of Charles I. The king's ghost nodded once, as if acknowledging the watchman's presence, then dissolved into mist. On the battlements of Windsor Castle, another Stuart spirit maintains his eternal watch. The Cavalier ghost represents the thousands of royalist soldiers who died defending Charles during the English Civil War. This phantom appears as a young officer in full 17th century military dress, his sword drawn and ready for battle that ended over 300 years ago. People have reported the sound of his boots walking across the stone battlements. His footsteps follow the same route each time he is seen, checking the same defensive positions that were crucial during the Civil War siege of Windsor in 1642. Some claim they can hear him calling out warnings to enemies who no longer exist. The ghost wears the plumed hat and flowing cape, typical of Cavalier officers, his uniform still bearing the colours of King Charles's army. His face remains partially hidden, but witnesses describe eyes that burn with unwavering loyalty to a cause that died with his king. He never acknowledges the living, never breaks from his patrol, as if the war continues in his ghostly world. Lady Margaret Pole, Countess of Salisbury, brings a different kind of Stuart tragedy to Windsor's halls. Although executed in Tudor times, her ghost was first reported in the Stuart era. She was executed at the Tower of London in 1541. Her ghost returned to Windsor, where she experienced the happiest years of her life, serving as governess to Princess Mary, who would later become Queen Mary I. Margaret's execution was one of the most brutal and sickening in English history. On the 27th May 1541, the aging countess, 67 years old, was dragged to the block by force. When she refused to place her head on the executioner's block, saying she had committed no crime, the executioner chased her around the scaffold, hacking at her neck and shoulders with his axe until she finally died. Reports claim it took 11 blows of the axe to behead her. Margaret's ghost appears as a weeping woman in a blood-stained gown, the fabric torn and stained from her violent death. She materializes in corridors throughout Windsor, but the scariest and chilling part is her cries heard within the stone walls. The sound is so heartbreaking that staff members have been moved to tears without understanding why. Her appearances always coincide with the anniversary of her execution. A mysterious figure, known only as the royalist spy, completes the fourth ghost in the Stuart hauntings. This unnamed ghost represents the countless men and women who died serving the crown during England's most turbulent century. Historical records suggest this spirit belonged to a courier, executed for carrying secret messages between Charles I and his supporters during the Civil War. The spy appears as a cloaked figure slipping through walls and appearing in shadowy corners throughout the castle. Does that remind you of something from a horror movie? Unlike other ghosts who follow seemingly predictable patterns, this phantom moves unpredictably, appearing to be always watching and always listening. Those who have reported it all say they feel observed during their rounds, as if invisible eyes track their every movement. Documents sometimes go missing from secured areas, only to reappear days later in different locations, as if the ghostly spy continues gathering intelligence for a king who died centuries ago. What unites all the Stuart spirits is their connection to England's greatest political crisis. Each ghost represents someone whose life was forever changed by the civil war that divided the nation. Their hauntings serve as eternal reminders that some wounds cut too deep for even death to heal. So far, we have heard of 7 Windsor ghosts. Now we move on to the Georgian era that brought prosperity to Britain, but personal tragedy to its royal family. King George III ruled for 60 years, longer than any king before him, but his reign was marked by devastating losses that drove him to madness. The American colonies declared independence. His mind began failing him in episodes that left him confused and frightened. When he died at Windsor Castle on the 29th of January 1820, his tortured spirit remained trapped within the walls where he spent his final years. George III's ghost appears most frequently at the Royal Library window, staring out at the grounds he once ruled with such authority. His phantom wears full military dress uniform, complete with medals and decorations that represent battles he commanded from thousands of miles away. The spectral king maintains perfect military posture, his back straight and shoulders squared, as if still trying to project the strength that abandoned him in his final years. Over the years, staff have documented dozens of encounters with George's spirit. His ghost appears so lifelike that new staff members have actually saluted him, only to realize moments later that they're acknowledging a phantom from the past. The apparition never responds to these gestures, remaining focused on whatever distant scene captures his eternal attention. One particularly detailed account comes from a guard who encountered George's spirit in the library during a winter night in 1963. The watchman was making his routine rounds when he noticed someone standing at the tall windows overlooking the castle grounds. Assuming a member of the royal household was working late, he approached to offer assistance. The figure turned, revealing the unmistakable features of George III, exactly as depicted in royal portraits. Queen Charlotte, George's devoted wife, brings a gentler presence to Windsor's haunted halls. She shared her husband's 60-year reign and 15 children, standing by him through his episodes of madness, when others in the court whispered about having him removed from power. When she died on the 17th of November 1818, 2 years before George, her loving spirit chose to remain at Windsor to watch over her suffering husband. Charlotte's ghost manifests in the private apartments where the royal family lived during their happiest years. Unlike the dramatic appearances of other royal spirits, her presence is felt rather than seen. Housekeeping staff describe the sensation of gentle hands guiding them through difficult tasks, as if an invisible supervisor is offering assistance and encouragement. The Phantom Queen's motherly nature extends beyond the living. Staff members working alone in the nursery quarters sometimes hear the soft humming of lullabies. These ghostly melodies float through empty rooms, where Charlotte once sang to her 15 children. The songs carry such warmth and comfort that several nannies have reported feeling completely at peace during their night duties, as if a loving grandmother spirit watches over every child who sleeps within the castle walls. The Duke of Cumberland, George III's younger brother, adds a military element to the Georgian hauntings. Prince William Augustus earned the nickname Butcher Cumberland for his ruthless tactics at the Battle of Culloden in 1746, where he crushed the final Jacobite uprising. His ghost appears in the castle's military quarters, forever reviewing phantom troops that exist only in his supernatural world. Cumberland's spirit manifests in full military regalia, his uniform bearing the battle honours he earned during decades of service. Guards report hearing his booming voice echoing through corridors as he barks orders to soldiers who died centuries ago. His ghostly inspections follow the same rigid schedule he maintained in life, always occurring at precisely 10 o'clock in the evening. The Georgian phantoms represent a family torn apart by duty, madness, and loss. Their ghosts reflect the personal costs of ruling an empire during one of history's most turbulent periods. Each spirit carries the weight of their earthly struggles into death. No era left a deeper supernatural mark on Windsor Castle than the Victorian age. Queen Victoria's 63-year reign transformed Britain into the world's greatest empire, but her personal life was defined by devastating loss. When Prince Albert died suddenly on 14th of December 1861 at age 42, Victoria plunged into a mourning period that lasted 40 years until her own death. This overwhelming grief created some of Windsor's most persistent and heartbreaking hauntings. Victoria's ghost appears as a veiled figure drifting through the East Terrace gardens, always dressed in the deep black mourning clothes she wore for 4 decades after Albert's death. Staff working late in the castle have glimpsed her silhouette among the trees. Gardeners have found fresh flowers placed on benches where Albert used to sit, though no living person put them there. These mysterious bouquets always include forget-me-nots and white roses, the same flowers Victoria carried at her wedding and placed on Albert's tomb every year until her death. The Blue Room, also known as the Albert Room, serves as the epicenter of Victorian supernatural activity. This chamber held special meaning for Victoria because she conducted countless séances here, desperately trying to contact Albert's spirit. Historical records show she consulted mediums regularly, hoping to receive messages from her beloved husband. These attempts to breach the barrier between life and death seem to have left permanent supernatural impressions on the room itself. Witnesses describe Victoria's ghost sitting rigidly at a small round table, her hands pressed flat against its surface in the classic séance position. Her spectral eyes remain fixed on an empty chair across from her, as if she can see someone no living person can perceive. One of the most documented encounters occurred in 1977, when a housekeeper discovered Victoria's ghost standing before Albert's portrait in their former private sitting room. The Phantom Queen reached toward the painting with trembling fingers, while whispering, "My dear one, why did you leave me in this cold world?" Her voice carried such raw pain that the housekeeper fled the room in tears. When she returned with other staff members, they found a single wet spot on the carpet beneath the portrait, tears that couldn't be explained by any earthly source. Prince Albert's spirit provides a stark contrast to his wife's tortured presence. While Victoria's ghost radiates grief and desperation, Albert's phantom brings comfort and warmth. His spirit is felt rather than seen, manifesting as sudden moments of peace during stressful situations, as if gentle hands rest on troubled shoulders. John Brown, Victoria's controversial Scottish servant, adds another layer to the Victorian hauntings. After Albert's death, Brown became Victoria's closest companion, leading to scandalous rumours about their relationship. When he died on the 27th of March 1883, Victoria grieved for him almost as deeply as she had for Albert. His ghost now patrols Windsor's corridors with the same fierce loyalty he showed in life. His phantom appears in full Highland dress, complete with his characteristic walking stick and tartan kilt. His spirit strides through the castle at night, with the confident bearing of someone who belongs there completely. Miss Catherine Hughes, a young Victorian governess who died tragically within the castle walls, creates Windsor's most playful ghost. Unlike the sorrowful royal spirits, her phantom delights in interacting with children who visit the castle. In the nursery quarters, young visitors have described meeting a kind lady in old-fashioned dress who teaches them Victorian games and songs. The Victorian ghosts represent love that transcends death itself. Victoria's 40 years of mourning created supernatural energy so powerful it still shapes Windsor's atmosphere. Albert's protective spirit, Brown's loyal devotion, and Hughes's playful nature show that not all hauntings come from tragedy. Sometimes they come from love too strong for death to break. Up to this point, we have heard about 11 ghosts at Windsor. Now we move to the 20th century, which brought unprecedented change to Windsor Castle and the entire world. Two devastating world wars, social revolution, and the decline of the empire created new supernatural residents who reflect the modern age's unique tragedies. These contemporary ghosts prove that Windsor's haunting power extends far beyond medieval times into our own era. King Edward VII, who ruled from 1901 until his death at Buckingham Palace on the 6th May 1910, aged 68, brought his love of luxury and entertainment into the afterlife. Known as the Playboy King before his coronation, Edward enjoyed cigars, fine dining, and elaborate parties throughout his reign. His ghost continues these earthly pleasures in supernatural form, creating one of Windsor's most distinctive hauntings. The Green Drawing Room serves as Edward's primary haunting ground, filled with the unmistakable aroma of expensive Cuban cigars, even when no one has smoked there for decades. Staff members entering this ornate chamber often detect the rich, woody scent hanging in the air like invisible smoke clouds. The smell becomes so strong during some encounters that people have searched frantically for hidden fires, only to realize they're experiencing a ghostly presence. Edward's phantom appears as a portly figure in formal evening dress, exactly as he preferred during his lifetime's endless social engagements. His silhouette flickers briefly in candlelight reflections and polished mirrors before vanishing into the ornate wallpaper. Unlike the tragic royal ghosts of earlier centuries, Edward's spirit seems content, as if death merely transferred his eternal party to a different plane of existence. The Second World War created its own supernatural legacy when the royal family took refuge at Windsor during the London Blitz. The constant threat of German bombing brought new ghosts to the castle, spectral air raid wardens and phantom Home Guard soldiers who continued their protective duties decades after the war ended. Staff members working during the 1970s and 1980s reported seeing figures in gas masks patrolling the battlements during foggy nights. These ghostly sentries wear the distinctive equipment of wartime civil defense volunteers, their spectral forms moving with the careful precision of men scanning the skies for enemy aircraft. Their presence intensifies during thunderstorms, as if the sound of thunder triggers memories of falling bombs. The most documented modern encounter occurred in 1987, when a guard spotted what appeared to be a living person standing watch on the castle's highest tower during a severe storm. The figure wore a steel helmet and carried equipment that looked decades out of date. When the guard called out, the phantom turned toward him, revealing the hollow eye sockets of a gas mask before dissolving into the rain-soaked darkness. These modern ghosts prove that Windsor Castle's supernatural power adapts to each new era. Whether they died from royal excess, wartime wounds, or simple devotion to duty, these 20th century spirits add contemporary chapters to the castle's eternal story. Their hauntings remind us that death creates no barrier between past and present within Windsor's ancient walls. Beyond the famous royal spirits, Windsor Castle harbours 10 additional ghosts whose identities remain lost to history. These nameless phantoms represent the countless servants, guards, prisoners, and children who lived and died within the castle walls across nearly 1,000 years. Their stories may be forgotten, but their supernatural presence proves that death recognizes no difference between kings and commoners. The Phantom Guardsmen represent centuries of soldiers who dedicated their lives to protecting the monarchy. This spectral sentry appears along the Long Walk, the tree-lined avenue that stretches for nearly 3 miles from Windsor Castle toward the horizon. His ghost wears the distinctive red uniform of the Coldstream Guards, complete with the tall bearskin hat that has become symbolic of royal protection. Witnesses describe him marching with perfect military precision, his boots striking the ground in the rhythmic cadence that echoes through Windsor Great Park. His phantom maintains the same route that living guards have patrolled for generations, never deviating from his eternal duty. When approached by curious observers, he simply vanishes mid-step, as if stepping through an invisible doorway back to the spirit world. In the castle kitchens, the Victorian scullery maid continues her endless work. This tragic spirit represents the dozens of young women who spent their entire lives in service to the royal household, scrubbing pots, washing dishes, and maintaining the massive kitchens that fed hundreds of people daily. Her ghost appears as a slight figure in a stained apron, her sleeves rolled up for work that never ends. Kitchen staff, working early morning shifts, report hearing the sound of frantic scrubbing echoing from empty sinks. Phantom soap bubbles sometimes appear in basins that contain no water, while invisible hands seem to move cleaning supplies from shelf to shelf. The ghostly maid's weeping can be heard during quiet moments, a sound so heartbreaking that several modern kitchen workers have been moved to tears without understanding why. The Round Tower houses Windsor's most tortured spirit, a medieval prisoner whose chains still rattle in chambers that once served as dungeons. This nameless ghost represents the countless men who were imprisoned, tortured, and executed within the castle's walls during its early centuries as a fortress. His presence brings an atmosphere of such intense despair that sensitive visitors often flee the area in tears. The sound of heavy iron chains dragging across stone floors echoes through the tower's lower levels, especially during winter months when the walls run with condensation like tears. His phantom appears briefly as a hunched figure in rags, his wrists bearing the marks of manacles that held him during his final days. The overwhelming sense of injustice that surrounds his appearances suggests he died for crimes he never committed. 4 Tudor children haunt the castle gardens, their laughter carrying on the wind. These young spirits are believed to be victims of the plague that swept through England during the 16th century, claiming rich and poor alike without discrimination. Their ghosts appear dressed in the elaborate clothing of wealthy Tudor youngsters, complete with small ruffs and miniature court dress. Visitors with children often report their young ones becoming fascinated with empty sections of the gardens, giggling and pointing at spaces where adults see nothing. The phantom children seem drawn to the innocent joy of living youngsters, perhaps seeking the playmates that death stole from them centuries ago. Their ghostly games of hide-and-seek continue endlessly among the hedgerows and flower beds where they once played in life. The White Lady glides through various corridors throughout the castle, her identity completely lost to history. She appears as an elegant woman in flowing white robes, her face hidden by a veil that seems to move without any earthly breeze. Her presence brings the overwhelming scent of roses mixed with an inexplicable sadness that touches everyone who encounters her. Unlike the dramatic manifestations of royal ghosts, the White Lady appears just at the edge of vision. Staff members describe glimpsing her reflection in mirrors and windows, always turning away just as they try to focus on her image. Her appearances seem connected to moments of great emotion within the castle, as if she's drawn to human sorrow or joy. The ghostly butler represents the dedicated household staff who spent their entire lives maintaining Windsor's countless rooms and corridors. His phantom appears in the state apartments, forever tending to duties that death couldn't end. Witnesses describe him bowing politely before vanishing, his ethereal form dressed in the formal attire that marked his position in the household hierarchy. Furniture sometimes moves slightly overnight in rooms where his presence is strongest, always arranged in more aesthetically pleasing configurations. Fresh flowers appear in vases that were empty the previous evening, placed with the careful attention to detail that marked professional service staff of earlier eras. The weeping woman haunts the East Terrace, her Victorian mourning dress trailing behind her as she searches for someone who will never return. Her heartbroken sobs echo across the gardens during misty evenings, a sound so filled with loss that groundskeepers have learned to avoid certain areas when her cries begin. These 10 nameless spirits prove that Windsor Castle's supernatural residents include every level of society. Their hauntings remind us that history remembers kings and queens, but forgets the countless ordinary people whose lives and deaths also shaped the castle's character. Thank you for watching these spooky stories from Windsor Castle. With its 1,000 years of history, it is no wonder there are so many stories, and I am sure there will be many more.